Well, welcome everybody to Dunsink Observatory. My name is Peter Gallagher. I'm the director of the observatory. So I come here, pleasure coming here every single day. My office is upstairs, and all of my colleagues in the high vis are also work here and are researchers of one form or another, either PhD students or postdoctoral fellows or professors. So if you've got any hard questions or easy questions that you want to ask us, please do. We'd be happy to talk to you about stars, the planets. The sun is my favorite topic, and also we love this building that you're in here, because we're very much here to see the building and learn more about the building. So, Walter got the observatory. We're delighted today to have Aideen here today, who is going to talk to us about the history of the observatory, but also the history of Armagh as well. Aideen has a lot of experience in kind of heritage and architecture, and then has also spent the past number of years trying to understand the observatories and the landscape that they sit in, and the cultures of the observatory back in the, I guess, late 1700s and early 1800s. So welcome, Aideen. Look forward to talking.
Thank you for having me, and it's lovely to see everyone here, a big full room, which is great. So my name is Aideen Heron. I'm a researcher in historic scientific landscapes. And I focus on especially ones in Ireland, and Dunsink is one of a favourite of mine. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the foundation of Dunsink in the context. Oh, sure. Is that better? Yeah. I'm just going to talk about Dunsink in the context of the 18th century. So Dunsink has had a long history as a functioning observatory, which continues to be prominent in the scientific community, as the members of DIAS will testament to today. But I want to draw you all back to the very beginning of this history, to its foundation period in the late 18th century. However, even before that, it's important to understand why observatories in the 17th and 18th centuries in the British Empire were even being built at all. So in the early modern period, new human abilities to explore the globe by sea, using new astronomical methods to ensure that you wouldn't get lost, quickly made astronomy an invaluable tool for empire. When these previously unseen lands were reached, the methods of surveying them for value and to ensure a legitimate bid for ownership also relied on astronomy to create accurate maps of these areas. Astronomical observation, terrestrial surveying, and nautical navigation all work together to allow the expansion of the British Empire. This quote is a sharp criticism of that nature of the British Empire, but it was made possible in large part by scientific developments in astronomical surveying. The expansion of the British Empire was one of conflicting and shifting traditions, and one that utilised the technological development of astronomy and surveying to continue. But briefly, in order for voyages to be made to new places, ships needed to know where they were going, or at least have an idea of how long that would take to get there. But this meant that they needed to have a map of the skies, which required something which we now have and use on our phones on a regular basis, a geographical positioning system, or GPS, which means they needed to map the latitude and the longitude of the world. Crews could already calculate their latitude, so their position from north to south in relation to the sun, but they could not calculate their longitude, which is their position from east to west. And attempts to find longitude in the early 18th century had been really unsuccessful in both France and Britain. And it was such a difficult and pressing problem that this painting of Bethlehem Royal Hospital, a mental hospital, portrays one man in the background trying to figure it out and sliding into insanity in the process. It was indeed very important for Britain to make it easier for crews at sea, as when ships struggled to accurately plot their position at sea, voyages would take much longer than expected and prove more difficult than anticipated. So a Longitude Act in 1714 announced a scheme intended to reward the longitude solution that was practical and useful at sea, which was judged by a board of longitude. So government funding for the Board of Longitude made it clear that pursuits in astronomical surveying that served the economic expansion of the British Empire were really desired. And in the end, longitude was finally achieved with two different methods in the mid-18th century. One was by a combination of works by Tobias Mayer, a terrestrial surveyor and astronomer, James Bradley, the third Astronomer Royal at Greenwich Observatory, the head astronomer, and Neville Maskelyne, a British mathematician, astronomer, Church of England minister, and eventual Astronomer Royal. Neville Maskelyne used a combination of Mayer's tables and James Bradley's marine sextant in 1761 to observe the transit of Venus across the face of the Sun, and by performing a series of complicated calculations, he discovered that he was able to determine longitude accurately after performing lengthy calculations. The other method was by using an extremely accurate chronometer or timepiece aboard a ship that matched that on land, and this was created by John Harrison. So these discoveries for the British Board of Longitude and by scientists in Britain cemented the important position of the Royal Greenwich Observatory in astronomical circles, which had been established in the 17th century and as a keystone for the empire. In order for sailors to avoid having to perform the lengthy calculations that he had at sea, as this would take too long, Maskelyne published the first number of the Nautical Almanac for the year 1767. He had gotten the idea from the French almanac, which had been publishing the locations of celestial bodies since the late 1600s. And the Nautical Almanac was designed for the use of seamen and particularly to facilitate the employment of the method of lunar distances for determining longitude. So crews at sea calculated lunar distance, also called a lunar, angular distance between the moon and bright reference objects such as the sun or one or more bright stars, noted the angle, and then used the Nautical Almanac to view a prepared table of these distances. They could use this and compare it with time of Greenwich. Knowing this, they could figure out their longitude. The development of the symbiotic relationship between astronomy and the government is exemplified in this royal warrant for Greenwich Observatory, which explicitly tasked the Astronomer Royal to find longitude. So the use of astronomy as a tool of the British Empire was significantly underway by the time that Dunsink was founded in 1785. Encouragement from the monarch in matters of navigation and astronomy was seen extremely early in the British Empire's expansion, following the independent establishment of the Scientific Society, the London Society, in 1670. King Charles II established the London Society as the Royal London Society by a charter. He singled out astronomy and navigation as important scientific fields. So British development of astronomical technologies in the world of navigation meant in the 18th century, Britain could focus on establishing its authority in many parts of the world. This occurred in a number of ways. As I said before, by making accurate maps of the whereabouts of newly acquired lands, one's geographical position needed to be calculated, and this was done by astronomical methods. The requirement of the accurate information required to make these calculations could only be gained by using scientific instruments such as the telescope or the clock, and these needed to be protected from outdoor environments. And so it was deemed necessary to set up observatories in England, but also outside of England, in order to gather information in the name of the empire. Permanent observatories were set up in particularly valuable or useful locations in the British Empire. Here we can see a timeline of significant and important ones in the 18th century. We have the Royal Greenwich Observatory that was built in the 17th century, the King's Observatory, England, which was initially a royal and private, later a state observatory, the Radcliffe Observatory, which was in Oxford and technically the first university observatory. And very early in the timeline, we also have Dunsink, which was considered both a royal and university observatory. So while Greenwich was solely commissioned to determine the places of the stars to aid for longitude, Dunsink's astronomers were required to make regular observations of the heavenly bodies and of the sun, moon, and planets, and reduce these in relation to the meridian, which could then be used to further develop the Nautical Almanac for voyages and terrestrial survey. Transit timings were the most accurate method of measuring the positions of heavenly bodies, and this could be achieved using different instruments alone or in combination. To measure these coordinates, the most commonly used instrument was the mural quadrant, the meridian, and transit circles. When it was first founded, Dunsink's ordered instruments were a transit instrument, a meridian circle, an equatorial instrument, and an achromatic telescope, plus 2 clocks. For Dunsink, there were various documents which formally established its origins, foundation, and initial purpose, and these documents provide an example of the interesting combination of identities that Dunsink owns. It was a state-sanctioned institution with a British royal charter as well as a university observatory. This established that the astronomer at Dunsink should be known as the Andrews Professor and as the Royal Astronomer of Ireland. Here, his duties were explicit, and it should be noted that the professorship should hold and enjoy the same to all intents and purposes and shall be defined and taken to be the Royal Astronomer of Ireland on the foundation of the Dr. Francis Andrews. This meant that Dunsink was firmly placed in a hierarchy of the British government, encouraged astronomical disciplines. It was also a university observatory with its funding coming directly from Trinity College, Dublin. The head astronomer of the observatory was a physical manifestation of this duality, eventually having both the titles Andrew Professor of Trinity and Royal Astronomer. It should be noted that these weren't necessarily conflicting identities. Trinity was established in Dublin in 1592 as an Elizabethan and Protestant institution, and in the 18th century, an integral part of the culture of the Protestant ascendancy. The desires of the university and the monarch were united, and the observatory was envisioned as a royal institution in Ireland. As an institution that was established by a royal charter, Dunsink would have been expected to help aid and fulfil the objectives of a growing British Empire in its quest to extend its influence and land ownership. As a younger observatory, and especially one that was not in England, Dunsink could initially be considered to be by nature submissive to the Royal Greenwich Observatory. However, though the designers of Dunsink sought advice and knowledge from the Royal Greenwich Observatory, the design of Dunsink improved upon the design of Greenwich and was novel in a number of ways. One of these novelties was its siting. The terms of the bequest for Dunsink only stated that it should be anywhere deemed most convenient, and this can be interpreted as most convenient to the astronomer in order for him to make his observations, or convenient for the college. At this time, the University Observatory was built within the campus, such as Radcliffe at Oxford. Placing Dunsink outside of the campus at some distance from the city was an original idea at the time, and Henry Usher, the first Andrews professors at Dunsink, had the major role in deciding the site, the form, and the general provisions of Dunsink. Usher notes that it might be thought that the study of the celestial bodies would be free from thinking about terrestrial minutiae. It was due to earthly influences on the instruments required to make these observations that problems would arise. He was aware of the importance of selecting a site that would most benefit the observational instruments, and he was very focused on the need to measure stellar positions and the motion of celestial bodies with the utmost precision. His main task was to design a building suitable for instruments and clocks that made the observations. He had to mitigate local refraction caused by differences in temperature in the air surrounding the telescope. He therefore sought a firm bedrock where the horizon was unobscured by hills, and one that would also be in reasonable proximity to Trinity. The proximity of the observatory to the Tuca Valley was a favoured location for Dublin's suburban villas, as shown in this map. And similarly to the preferred villas of the northern banks, as noted above, the observatory enjoyed views of the Dublin mountains, which provided picturesque views as well as having advantages for observation. It was known at the time for having theatrical and literary credentials. The observatory was only 4 miles to Dublin City, which lay to the southeast. Interpretation can be drawn from this map, which shows which shows the tangible connection between the observatory and the city of Dublin, and denotes significance to the Dunsink side of the town. The entrance to the north of Phoenix Park, which led directly from the town lot in which Dunsink sat, is named Observatory Gate. This is now known as Ashtown Gate. Despite its eventual replacement, the installation of Observatory Gate in the most prominent royal park in Ireland communicates the prominence of Dunsink at the time, as well as providing insight into how the building was connected to the city and the university. And this is the observatory site seen in 1840. We can see the main observatory building in the centre, formal gardens to the rear, a parkland to the front, and stables to the north side. Crucially, the architectural and siting origins of Dunsink marked a change in the structure of science in Europe, where ancient beliefs and methods were abandoned. The link here is the change in scientific method, experimentation, and proof, and the new dependence that scientists had for their instruments. And so for astronomers, the instruments of an observatory were the pendulum clock and the telescope. During the earlier part of the 17th century, due to the smaller size of their instruments, astronomers found it possible to make observations from the open windows or roofs of their already built houses or university buildings. And the observatories built at this time consisted of turrets or platforms added to existing buildings. They were little more than observation platforms. As telescopes increased in complexity and size, revision for a specially tailored physical setting became necessary, and the observatories of Paris and Greenwich, shown here, are examples of this understanding. Comparatively, during and particularly at the end of the 18th century, a huge number of newly founded observatories marked a design change seen in Europe, as astronomical tools and equipment were transferred from light portable equipment to permanent mounted accurate instruments. The theory at Dunsink was that everything should be functional and scientific. Everything from the design, the orientation, and the scale was inventive. Usher had stipulations that Dunsink should be a low building, not a tower, which would have appeared strange to those from earlier in the century. As Dunsink had what was effectively a separate building for the fixed instruments, the wings that are seen here were actually not built. This is a plan of the observatory. To the top of the picture, you can see the meridian room. This would be the room that we are in now, although this is rebuilt. The cross of foundations is seen that would have housed the instruments on top of it. The observatory's construction was overseen by the architect and builder Graham Myers, and men who have been known to work on initial building phases included George Darley, a stonemason, John Semple, a bricklayer, and Michael Stapleton. Usher placed the meridian room in the west of the plan so that any smoke from the domestic chimneys of the house was blown away from the observing room by the prevailing wind. The design of Dunsink was focused on how to achieve the best observations. Additionally, the instruments that Dunsink was eventually provided were with the highest quality. Dunsink marked an important advance in observatories by the introduction of two new elements. The first was the isolation of the stone piers for the 28-inch telescope in the dome, and the instruments in the meridian room, which were built to rise from the bedrock through the floors without touching the floors, so that the instruments would not vibrate and affect the observations. The second was a central pier for the telescope in the dome. The location of this kind of telescope was already familiar in the 18th century in the highest observing room of the building. However, at Dunsink, its support came directly from the ground through a mass of masonry with no open chamber below the observing room. The revolving dome above was specially constructed to prevent the transmission of heat and to aid in the maintenance of a constant temperature within the dome. Additionally, there was a maintenance of a constant temperature by the installation of segmental openings in the walls of the meridian rim and the dome, which are indicative of scientific rather than architectural progress. As I said, even the timber floorboards of the meridian rim were placed so as not to disturb the instruments. Unfortunately, the original meridian room of Dunsink was destroyed by fire, and the replacement room that we are in today used concrete for the floor. However, due to its innovation and success, Dunsink's meridian room was imitated by other observatories in the British Empire, and a similar design is seen at the Edinburgh City Observatory. Here you can see how the floorboards were constructed around the pillars, but do not touch them. The South Dome and telescope, which we will go out to see later, were added in the mid-19th century. Dunsink Observatory started a scientific history in Ireland that was continued by Armagh Observatory, seen here, which was established soon after with a very similar design, incorporating the stone pillars, but had its own siting considerations directly related to the Robinson of the Church of Ireland. The observatory, like several of the Archbishop's foundations, was built on a hill so that it could be seen against a natural woodland setting from his bishop's palace. It was designed by Francis Johnson. The new observatory was the second to be established in Ireland. It is the oldest scientific institution in Northern Ireland. This developed into the establishment of 19th century observatories by amateur gentlemen scientists such as the Earls of Ross at Birr, the Coopers at Mark Creek Castle, and the Wilsons at Darramona Observatory. Well, Dunsink was adopted by DS in the 1940s after partition as an example of the Republic's desire to be included on the scientific international stage. Its historic connections should not be forgotten, as this was the reason it was built. Its design shows the innovation of the scientists and architects of the time and the reason why they built this building the way they did. This observatory and those that followed it represented a new kind of science serving the needs of the global empire. As astronomers and observers set their sights on the telescopes in the heavens, they also drew together disparate parts of the Earth. Thank you very much.
Very much. You can see those semicircular windows that Aileen was pointing out on either side of this room, and they were to allow airflow in to keep the temperature inside and outside, what I was saying. And another thing you can notice in this room is this area here used to open up before the fire in 1977, as did this. And in that drawing, there are the locations of where the piers were. And one was here, and two over there, and two here. And then the telescopes would look out through these windows at night and work out the transit of stars going overhead. And then they would set time and longitude as Aileen talked about. So thank you very much for a fascinating talk, Aileen. Does anybody have any questions for Aileen? Who's going to ask the first hard one? Any young people here with older people can also ask hard questions. Right. I'm going to start with you.
It was built in 1785.
So the observatory is, how old does that make it? 1785, clear maths there. 2024 minus 1785, and we'll come back to you. Very quiet for a while. Next question. Yes. The reason of the fire here?
I'm actually not sure it was ever fully found out why there was a fire, but I know that the astronomers' family at the time were actually not in the building when it happened. So I think it was obviously very sad to have lost such a historic and interesting part of architecture of the building.
Yeah, the director of the observatory and his wife were in Edinburgh at the time, but the kids were actually in the house. And there's a room where Professor Katrina Jackman's office is. It was the son's room, and he saw the flames leaping out from underneath the building. And so then they called the fire brigade, and the fire brigade turned up and put out the fire in this section. So thankfully, we didn't lose the rest of the building. That would have been a real tragedy. And I'll just show you, there was another tragedy that happens. Anybody can guess what might have been on that? What? Any ideas? There was a moon rock on it. So there was a moon rock inside the grain of rice. I don't know why it's called a moon rock, but anyway, it's a moon rice fish. And it was there, and during the fire, this got damaged, and the moon rice fish was in a little piece of plastic, and it melted. And then when we other people made this mistake. Came in and they took all the rubbish and they dumped it in Dunsink dump. There's a bit of moon rock over in Dunsink dump. All right, any other questions right here?
So there was normally like a family living here as well as research, or
Yeah, it would have been a country house, really, almost in a way that you had the observation rooms, you had the dome, and you had this room, but the rest of the building really was just used as almost a mansion, and the family would have lived here, yeah, and often taken part in some of the scientific work that was done here as well.
so is that why they had stables, or did they?
Yeah, partly, yeah, probably though, if it was only one person living here anyway, they would have used stables at the time, but yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, the job of director used to come with living here, but in 1993, the director stopped living here. So the dump was there, and it was a difficult place to live in. Smells, brass.
I remember, yeah.
So you remember?
Going to the dump and mattresses around and everything.
Yeah, we still get mattresses on the road and other things dumped on the road. So yeah, that would be interesting. But I started here 6 years ago. There were still beds upstairs So we dumped the mattresses. All right, Holly, and Jim. Right. How did they get the moon rock agus Australia? Yeah. So the moon, she wants, so the moon rock was sent by Nixon, who was the president of the United States of America, and he sent little moon rocks around the world to different friendly nations, and we were one of the friendly nations. But it was a certain man. What was the name of the first person to walk on the moon? Neil Armstrong. Thank you very much. He brought that moon rock back, and that's what we have in one of those hollow moon rocks. There's another one in the museum, so we're not complete laggards. That's funny, that's another story. Yes.
So what's the official title of the observatory now? Is it still royal in the title, or was that disposed of in the events?
It's a funny one. It was never really referred to as a royal observatory. That was sort of my deduction. But even though the name of the main astronomer was the Royal Astronomer, so it was never called the Royal Dunsink Observatory in the way that Greenwich is the Royal Greenwich Observatory. Its current title
is DIAS Dunsink Observatory because it's run by the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies. But it's funny about that royal one because I've never understood why it wasn't the Royal Observatory at Dunsink, because you've the Royal Greenwich Observatory, the Royal Edinburgh. Why wasn't it the Royal Dublin? I don't know. Yeah, King George III issued one in 1790.
Yeah, 1792.
1792. Yeah. So that established the Astronomer Royal at Dunsink, but not a Royal Observatory. Yeah.
I regret it by myself, actually. I don't see any modern observation with it, so there's no observation taken there anymore. Right?
No, there are some, and there are some observations taken. I mean, for us, there's about 15 researchers upstairs. Most of our data comes from either European Space Agency or NASA satellites, so that's the best place to be to make good observations nowadays. This observatory wasn't useful for making measurements of stars from about 1900, but it's a great place to work, very inspirational place to work. We do have a number of instruments, though. There's a magnetometer measuring the Earth's magnetic field at the back. There's an antenna out there on top of the original telescope lens, which is measuring the ionosphere. There's some cameras looking at fireballs and so on. So there are some instruments, but sensitive astronomical instruments cost €1 billion and are on top of big mountains on the space. So we don't have anything with €1 billion here, I'm sure.
Did the researchers here have any interactions with the teams that would be working with the James Webb Telescope and their research findings?
Yeah, so there's about 30 of us overall working in astrophysics at DIAS, and there's one group of those 30 who work on the James Webb Space Telescope data. In fact, we tested some of the filters that were flown on the James Webb. So there's an instrument called MIRI, the mid-infrared instrument, and that telescope, we're getting data from that. It tells you about infrared light, and infrared light tells you where stars and planets are formed. So there's a group of people who are looking at where stars and planets are formed. Then I'm interested in how sun influences stars, and Katrina is interested in how other planets are influenced by the sun. So we kind of have a real test bed for star-planet interactions here, and then we can kind of use what we learn here to what we see in James Webb. That's kind of the connection between us.
Where are you about the transitioning measurement that's going through here? Because it was measuring time, and how are they actually measuring that? There's a transition book coming here to talk about that. So how do they so when somebody goes by, somebody can watch, if your watch is wrong, and every emphasis of chicken and eggs.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that you do know. So if I'm standing here and I look at a star going over, I can measure its elevation. That's one of the things. And then I can measure a time that it goes, my local time of its passage over. Then Greenwich will do the same, Vienna will do the same, and so on. And you'll all record the time that went over at your position and compare results. There's a book here with all the results compared. And then we did it for about 100 years. Yeah. Yes, sorry, there was somebody over here first of all, yes.
Not very scientific question, just the Northern Lights, recently. I just wonder why, you look up and you mightn't see much, but if you take a picture with your iPhone, you can see, you know, a really good picture. It happened to be down in West Cork.
Yeah, I mean,
Why is that, you know?
just some, I mean, some kind of, your eye has a range of sensitivity, and that has a range of sensitivity, and they're just different. That, I mean, that's the answer. It's got more sensitivity. So when you look up and see kind of a grey cloud like that, you put your phone up and see it's green.
Yeah.
Your phone's just a bit more sensitive to green light. And also your eye is kind of constantly taking in, so whereas this can wait a little while and it can accumulate all of the light coming in and make it brighter. So it's make it brighter and it's a bit more sensitive. So that's the reason behind it. But the aurora's been amazing. It's amazing. This lady over here.
Yes, is there still a
Not a formal link. So Eamon de Valera, he founded DIAS in 1940. Actually, as Aidan said, really to kind of put up the flag for independent Ireland and say, you know, we can also do international groundbreaking research. And he hired Erwin Schrödinger, who was the inventor, one of the inventors of quantum mechanics. But he also tried to attract in Albert Einstein. There's a lovely letter from Schrödinger to Einstein trying to get Einstein to come to Ireland. Actually, this is now stay in Princeton. So that's where he stayed. But then he loved quaternions and Hamilton. He was really interested in Hamilton and Hamilton's mathematics, which is called quaternions. And he had a real draw for this observatory. And Trinity weren't using it. They had it closed for about 30 years. And then he bought it for the state. So the OPW owns this, but we have a lease on it. Is the way it works. So DIAS has a lease on it. And many of us don't teach at different universities. So we teach in Trinity. Our students are registered. You're registered in Maynooth, right? There's no other students around here. Other students upstairs are registered in Trinity and registered in UCD in other parts. So because we can't award PhDs, so we get PhDs awarded by partner universities. Yes, you do.
Going back to time and the.
Sorry, we're getting into science here. We have to ask first one.
Particular clocks in Dublin were held to show that.
Yeah.
Balanced clocks section 2.1. That's the case because one thing that goes to be about Dublin, all public clocks and they're either long or don't.
Yeah. Do anything use clocks anymore? Yeah. I mean, there was a time service set up for Dublin. The time service was based on a time taken in this room. And so the clocks are outside here, so we set the clock, and there was a wire that went down to the GPO, there was a wire that went down to Ballast House beside Upper Bridge, and there was another wire that went to Trinity College, the Museum building, there was another wire that went to the Central Bank, or Bank of Ireland. And they were also, this was the master clock, and they were the slave clocks, and that kept them regular. And there was a time ball. Really cool. And the time ball used to drop 1 GMT every day, which was between 1870 and about 1916. And it used to drop at 1 GMT. Caused trouble, there's all kinds of trouble because we weren't using GMT at the time. We were on Dublin mean time, 25 minutes, 21 seconds off Greenwich mean time. And then that got James Joyce really interested in it. And so Leopold Bloom was walking along the River Liffey looking up, and he sees it and goes, oh, that's not our time, Dunsink time. No, that's French. And he starts thinking about parallax and the stars and all that thing. So at the end of this rambling answer, I don't know what the end is. That's it. The questions shall continue, but we better go out and have a look at the highlights here. I want to thank our speaker again, Edie.